Hi everyone, welcome to Potluck Food Talks. I'm Vladimir Putin and I'm here with my friend Kim Jong-un and we're going to conquer some lands across the globe.
We're finally conquering the Basque Country.
So what's the plan? We're going to Orion now.
Yeah, first the plan is not to drive over any little puppies.
Yeah, the place we're going is Bodegón José Mari. I know you saw the videos. Like,
I did. It's iconic.
very classic fish grilling. How do you say besugo in English?
I have no idea actually. Besugo is like a super popular fish here, and like a really expensive fish also. No, besugo is it's pricey, right?
Yeah, I think if you go to this grill places, it's a big piece of fish, the greatest you can get.
Yeah, it's super meaty and delicious. Yeah, but I have no idea what it's called actually.
But they were very pioneer in the besugo grilling in the region. And I don't know when they opened, but they're for sure over 50 years old, that place.
Yeah, it's like super iconic. You said they were pioneering in like the fish grilling technique, no?
That's what I was explaining yesterday, that there are two schools, the Orio school and the Guetaria school. We're going to drive by Guetaria, where El Cano is. Have you been to El Cano Chiqui?
I've never been to either El Cano or El Cano Chiqui.
I think you would love both of them. Well, they're completely different experiences. El Cano is like a fine dining setting. And El Cano Chiqui is more like a casual place, you know, but they have the same produce from El Cano. You have to book and you can only be there for 2 hours. And you're kicked out because they have the table so they do double sittings.
That's fair enough.
And I mean, it's a very casual place, you know, like you go there, you have your whole menu. I remember the last time I was there, we were a little bit late and they were like, they didn't allow us to, because we were ordering a la carte. And it was like, that's too much. And
you're not going to finish it.
It will take too long.
Yeah.
And we have to leave.
Yeah.
We want our afternoon break, so you're late, you know?
That's really funny. Yeah, but I mean, obviously El Cano, you know, is now also world famous, you know, as like the reference. I remember when I first came to the Basque Country, it was like, kind of like everybody was talking about Etxebarri. And people were sort of like, yeah, but have you heard of El Cano? And now it's like just as famous, you know.
But I'm glad that the selection of places we're avoiding the golden route that everybody does, which is Etxebarri, Casa Julián, El Cano. Like everybody knows that, and I think there's so much more to it, like to get to other places and other villages around San Sebastian that are lesser known for the larger public. And I think that's the whole point.
Yeah.
And yesterday we had an interesting experience at Muka that sparked like a debate about desserts and restaurants. And some people think in many fine dining restaurants or high-end restaurants, it's like a turnoff when the desserts come. It's like, this was an amazing menu, like an amazing experience, and suddenly, here it comes, desserts. And you have like lame desserts. They just don't add or stand up to the level of the rest of the experience in many cases. What are your thoughts about that?
I don't necessarily agree with that. Yeah, so a lot of people say the main thing that people are going to remember from a dinner is the dessert, because it's the last thing that they have. You want to end on a high note. And there's a lot of importance put on desserts. But, you know, the other half is kind of sort of like, well, how do you want people to leave? Like, should it just be like a light refreshment? There's also like the discrepancy between kind of like, well, do you want something rich and something filling? Or do you actually want the opposite of that? Do you want something really light and refreshing? Or do you on purpose give people like both options? This is, you know, the people have different opinions about this.
Yeah, for example, my opinion is, so I personally, when after a long tasting menu, I rather have something light, especially light and not so overwhelmingly, you know, like with many components. I already have that, you know, like what we had yesterday is like very like 2-3 element desserts, like, or even like just one main element, you know, like this is an ice cream, this is a panna cotta, this is a piece of fruit, you know,
Sure.
With an ice cream or something around. But a dessert that is already like a plated thing with many components, like a lot of information. I don't want that anymore at that point, I personally, in most cases.
Yeah, I totally get that, you know, I totally get that. And it's really difficult also from like a restaurateur's perspective. It's a difficult territory to navigate
Well, yet at the same time, I have to think about the dessert I had at Mass in Tokyo.
Yes.
That was at the same time one of the best chocolate desserts. No, for sure, the best chocolate dessert I've ever had.
What was it?
It was exactly the opposite from what I'm just preaching. It was a dessert with a lot of information. You know, because it was like a deconstruction of not only chocolate, cocoa, and the fruit, but also of the, so to say, related fruits from the same fruit family, from the Theobroma. So you had coco azul, which is not cocoa, but like a different fruit, a similar fruit from the same family, and another one, and cocoa in different. You had it fermented as chocolate, but also of the fresh fruit and juice form, and it was like an insane lot of information there. You had like 30 different components, but it was like almost like a psychedelic trip to the experience. You know, like
yeah.
Oh,
but that's cool because it's got a narrative and it's about a product that is tied to the identity of the restaurant. You know, it's kind of like with the apple yesterday that we had, you know, like apple, very, very significant for the Basque region. In desserts, you play with these like often, very, very often with these very, very classic fundamental ingredients. Like, for example, we were talking about vanilla, right? And it's kind of like, it's very interesting to me to have a dessert that like showcases vanilla as not just like, because vanilla is a luxury product, but often it's sort of like this bastardized kind of like, let's just fucking put vanilla in it, whatever.
Yeah.
Vanilla ice cream suddenly is like, you know, like it's kind of like vanilla ice cream suddenly is this like super.
I don't see suddenly in your contacts.
Fuck you! Shut up.
Like vanilla ice cream suddenly this like super normal thing, right? What is like mega special. And also vanilla beans have become really bastardized in my opinion. You get vanilla beans and they're like really, if you see a good vanilla bean, like a fucking juicy, full thing, it's very, very special. The flavor is very special. People kind of forget about this.
Also, people get very greedy about it. They add just like a micro pinch of vanilla to your ice cream just to say that's vanilla. What we had yesterday, you could really feel like vanilla. You know, this
yeah,
is
for sure.
Like the deep notes of it, because it's such a complex aroma. It has to be one of the most complex aromas there is.
100%.
And you can only experience it at its full if you add enough of it. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually for a while. My assistant head chef put a dessert on the menu, which was basically just a vanilla ice cream with a caramel sauce. But the ice cream is very well made with a shit ton of really high quality vanilla. And the caramel was a very special caramel cooked, very dark with like salted French butter, spices, and pineapple juice, amongst other things. So it was like very, very good. And people were really surprised. And obviously then it's also expensive. We sold that dessert. It was like a big scoop of ice cream for like, I think it was like 18 euros that we sold it as. And people were like, oh, vanilla ice cream for 18 euros. But then you get it and you eat it and you can't get it, you know, because it's, you know, it's generous with something very high quality. I always have to think of Thomas Keller, who says like, it's like one of the most important things for a chef is to be generous. And in examples like this, like vanilla ice cream, when you like, if you know, right? You want a vanilla ice cream that's like full of vanilla. And then you get like something that's like skimped out. It's really disappointing. And it really takes like the momentum out of your experience.
Also something I have to see, and for me that's very Mugaritz. Like all of the desserts were like a single component. That's also something that you see, like I work in many restaurants and the pastries, you know, and I always wanted to do desserts like in that direction. And many times the head chef would say, no, you have to do like a millefeuille and like this very complex things with complicated platings and complicated assembly, when you can do like just, you know, something that is just one element that is very easy to execute. Same with the petit fours, you know, like this over technical execution of something that in many cases is not even eaten, you know?
Yeah. And not put any attention to that much, you know?
That wouldn't make me so angry because it was what took the most effort in production.
Yeah.
And people would leave it untouched, you know?
Yeah, it's a real shame. But like, I really love the creativity in desserts. And actually, I had been thinking about this recently because I hired a new pastry chef. And she comes from a patisserie background. So in Germany, where I'm currently working, you have this thing called Konditor, Konditorin, which is like what? Pastries and primarily cakes, layered complex cakes. very cool profession. It's very cool that we have an apprenticeship for that profession because it's very, very unique. She now started in my restaurant, and when she's tasked with making desserts that fit into the menu, it's very difficult for her because it's a completely different approach of, especially with like the way that we're cooking, which is like very similar to what we ate at Muka yesterday. It's very minimalistic. It's like interesting combinations of a few elements that have to make sense. And she doesn't get that at all. She's like, let's make it always starts with a cake. I can make a biscuit, and then I can do a mousse, and then I'll make a gelatin of this, and then I can do this chocolate decoration. I'm like, no. We don't want that shit. It's not a cake shop, right? We want 3-4 items that are interesting and nice to eat and aesthetic, like, simple.
Yeah, and also where there is like a bold flavor statement, because
Yes.
that's it's like a completely different experience. The experience you have in a cake shop, where you get a cake like a petit gâteau in Paris, for example.
That's completely different. Yeah.
Where you open a cake and you have like this whole universe of different textures and flavors inside the cake.
Yes.
And just a spoonful, you have like 7 different things, 7 different elaborations. And yeah, that's a thing on its own, and it's also an experience on its own. You go there for that, and you're having that probably with a coffee or a tea.
Yeah.
And that's it. And you're having that in the mid of the afternoon or as a breakfast or whatever. But it's not like in the context of dinner or, like a dining experience.
It can be if that's what you want to go for. But so many other times, you want something, you want to keep that momentum going of sort of like, when you've already had, like 4, 5, 6 dishes that have been kind of, try to achieve something where you're sort of like a little element of surprise, a little bit of, okay, cool, I see, I haven't had this before. Then a cake's not going to do that, But that's in a tasting menu environment, obviously. Like we were talking yesterday about, somebody maybe wants something like indulgent. And the example of like a lava cake came up, which I think is super valid because nowadays I work in an environment where I don't do tasting menus. I do a la carte, right? And I want to make sure that everybody can get like what they feel like. If I had a dessert menu that only has a sorbet, an ice cream, and a panna cotta, I'd be like, well, what about somebody who really wants something super comfy, I think it's also important to cater to that. So we can't forget that as a chef, you're not just stroking your own ego with the cool combinations that you're making. At the end of the day, you want to sell something to people that they really want, that they really like, while not selling yourself out in the process.
Can you think of good examples of restaurants where you say this is what a good restaurant dessert is for me?
I mean, yesterday was pretty great.
Yesterday is a very good example, but some others. I can think of, in Paris, I went to Eels.
Yeah.
And I remember having there like desserts where you could get like impressive technique. Like getting surprised by, wow, I'm here getting different textures and different stuff, like in very little components. But it worked pretty well. For example, Fernando himself, he used to be a pastry chef at Amelia and Fismuler, exactly. Well, he actually developed the Basque cheesecake at Fismuler that has become also like an icon. We were just talking about Basque cheesecake, and the one he did, which is already part of one of the iconic desserts at Fismuler in Madrid, and that is a Basque cheesecake that actually you get the blue cheese. Last time I was at Amelia, and I remember having, I think the name is Vigilante, which is like an Argentinian dessert. Again, very simple, just goat cheese with sweet potato. Like an interpretation of an Argentinian dessert that felt like a little bit like membrillo, but with goat cheese. Super nice as well.
Nice. Sounds really good. Goat cheese with membrillo, that's such a good combination.
And sweet potato. For example, in my opinion, Germany is not a good example. Like the places I've been there, I also have to say I was there like a long time ago. There are, of course, exceptions that are exceptionally good desserts and restaurants. But like the typical thing is exactly all what we've talking about. Like add a cake to it, add vanilla because you need to add vanilla, but not too much because it's too expensive. And you get this over and over again in different restaurants.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Germany is a weird place anyway because they were very good at like this like high-level Michelin vibe, because of like all the like seriousness and the blah, but it's only now developing that they're kind of having a bit more of like an open style of cooking. Obviously, you know, also due to you know, all the sort of like immigrant exchange, you know, people coming to like places like Berlin and opening a little bit more sort of like casual places, because that's where the trend is also. Nobody wants to, I mean, not nobody, but so like few people want to go to these like 2-3 Michelin star places. They want restaurants that they can go to every week or every 2 weeks, or at least once a month if they want to. So you have all these chefs, we've talked about this many times before, you have all these chefs that come from the high level background and they want to do something accessible where their friends can also come maybe, you know, but with the same level of technique and quality. And there I feel like you get the coolest desserts, you know, kind of like what we did yesterday, where it's like minimalistic, cool ideas, things where, you know, earlier we were talking about what's intuition in cooking, you know, where you have intuitive combinations of things that are just very interesting and very delicious, that maybe you would have to have experienced to have the idea. And to then put that together into like simple desserts that are kind of like 3, 4, 5 spoonfuls at the end of your...
For me, also what determines like a good dessert or even a dish, if it's or what makes something memorable. For me, something is memorable if it's worth telling a story afterwards. You know, like, oh, I had this in this place that had this and that. For example, some of the things we had yesterday. There was this sour honey sauce. You know, like, or we had this intense vanilla, or this white chocolate with tonka beans. You know, like, where you can actually tell what you had, you know, like sometimes you have, you know, it's just whatever. It's just, okay, it was just a sweet bite after the meal.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think that too much emphasis is put on like smart combinations. Like that is definitely like a really cool thing when it's done right. But I also think that we mustn't forget that cooking is a craft, not just an art form, you know. And I think that very well executed things in flavor and in technique are very, very memorable. Like even just like an ice cream, a well-made ice cream that's nice and fatty but light, that isn't crystallized and that is perfectly seasoned, that's going to be memorable. A really nicely made souffle doesn't have to be like inventive, doesn't have to be creative. It just has to be well executed. And when you hit that sweet spot, then that's going to be memorable, you know? And of course there can be a combination between the two worlds, between the artistic and the craft. And that is what makes cooking so special, I think, is the combination of the two. But a lot of times people put too much emphasis, I think, on like, oh, let's try to make a cool combination, and then they forget about the other part. And then it reads cool on the menu on paper, but then you eat it and you're kind of like, you know, it sounded nice, but
that happens actually quite a lot.
Yeah,
that's another thing that in many places do desserts, like if there were no seasonality to it.
Totally.
And you know, like, okay, because you have creams and you have vanilla, you have chocolate, and you have these things that are temporary or not seasonal.
That's true.
But then,
which is not true, you know. I mean, like chocolate, yeah, but like vanilla and stuff, it does have like a season, you know, if you really get down to the nitty gritty of it.
There is a season for vanilla.
Yeah, it's like when it's better and when it's less good, for sure. It doesn't make a huge difference, but.
Okay, I didn't know about that, but because for me it's a spice, and in that regard you can buy it in a month and use it 10 months later. And
it's not going to be the same though.
Okay.
Like it's, I mean, if you really, like most people will probably not notice, and but yeah, it's kind of, even that I think you should approach with like
How do you treat vanilla? Do you freeze it or do you?
I keep it cold, and I try to buy it like relatively, like, I mean, not fresh obviously because it's not fresh, it's fermented, but I try to use it up as quickly as possible. I don't buy like a stock of vanilla and just have it hanging out, you know?
Okay.
Because my vanilla dealer is a guy from Iran, and he selects really high quality. It's super expensive, you know? It's like 500 euros a kilo.
Yeah.
But it'll be juicy, aromatic vanilla pots, you know? And like, how many times do you go to a supermarket, buy a vanilla pot? It's this little shriveled up thing that you can barely get any seeds out.
Yeah. Wow. It's a supermarket vanilla.
Yeah, exactly.
First of all.
Yeah. But you don't know how long it's been there also.
Yeah,
Could have been 3 years there.
Of course.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
No, of course. Yeah, there are vanillas and vanillas, and yeah, I agree, like, in everything you said. But yeah, not only fruits, but also vegetables. You can use vegetables in insanely interesting ways for desserts. I just mentioned this sweet potato with goat cheese and quince.
Yeah.
Like for a dessert, like it's like an interpretation of an Argentinian dessert, but elevated to a fine dining context. That's just an example. I've also seen desserts with aubergines, with eggplants. Like there are like a lot of things that you can turn sweet that are counterintuitive and just take advantage of the seasonality. Herbs also,
Absolutely.
like a basil mousse with something as classic as strawberries. It's incredible.
Yes.
Like also for herbs. Also for ice creams with different herbs. There's a whole universe that you can unlock just by paying attention to this kind of things.
Absolutely. I think also when we talk about seasonality, it's also like the sentiment of it. Because, for example, like you can make, I think it only makes sense to take advantage of the season, right? So like if strawberries are in season, like I want to absolutely showcase the strawberry, or like rhubarb, as soon as the first rhubarb comes, I want to showcase that. And when it's over, then I want to move on to the next thing. But it's also like, you can make a dessert with like a milk-based dessert with like stuff in summer. But you can also like leave it for winter when there's like a scarcity of produce. Like making a dessert based off, for example, just like milk and honey and like cereals, like grains and stuff like that. It's got a certain vibe and it's got a certain comfort. And this is a feeling that it gives you that's very nostalgic in a way, which can like fit really, really well in winter, when it's cold outside and you want something that's warm and comforting, where you don't necessarily want to rely on fresh produce. And like also moving with these sorts of like kind of like emotional approaches as sort of like, what kind of sensation does it give you after you've eaten it? I think that's something that people kind of neglect. Like, for example, this like dessert yesterday of the like stewed apple with the milk ice cream. That's like, even though I don't have particular childhood memories of eating apple with like milk, it's exactly that. You eat it and it's kind of like something that you would maybe eat if you're sick as a child, Stewed, sweet and sour apple, milky, fatty ice cream. And for me personally, that like ties into the seasonality just as much as anything else. Just like if you're drinking a cold soup in the midst of summer when it's boiling hot, or you're drinking a warm broth when it's raining outside in autumn, it's super, super impactful.
That's it for this week's episode of Potluck Food Talks. If you like what we're doing, make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok as Potluck Food Talks. The show airs every Monday.